Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is jasmine green tea from Upton Tea. And yeah, I really like jasmine tea, but I also know I should be drinking more green tea. And I keep saying that, and then I keep reverting to my old habits, but we'll see what I can do. Speaking of which, I keep saying that in June I'm going to finish so many books and make space for Jane Austen July. And I kind of do, but I kind of don't. So this is my June wrap up, and I read a good, for me, a decent amount of books. I mean, I should say I completed a good amount of books, but honestly, as far as accomplishments, I would say that I did a pretty decent job of DNFing, which doesn't mean usually that I'll never read those books again, but there were a couple that I probably won't. But mainly, I brought a bunch of books back to the library, which was great because I had to make space. But then, of course, after I did my Jane Austen July TBR, I ended up getting a little crazy and putting a bunch of Jane Austen related books on hold at the library. So that basically, I keep saying basically, that canceled out a lot of my progress. I didn't do a lot of, I know I haven't done a proper haul on here for a while, which doesn't mean I haven't been picking up books, but I haven't been buying that many books compared to what I could be doing. So in a sense, that's balanced out a little bit. And then some books I had for a long time on my currently reading on Goodreads, which means books that I had usually off of the bookshelf, usually with a bookmark in it or whatever. I'll keep the bookmark in it until I absolutely give up on a book in terms of I'm getting rid of the book in some way. But I managed to remove it from currently reading on Goodreads. Not all of them, but a good amount. So there was a decent amount of cleanup that I did. Could always be more, but I'm not going to worry about it because I also want to enjoy my reading month no matter what. And you will see from the two books that I read that I kind of started Jane Austen July a little early, and I don't have a problem with that because I may also keep going with it in August if I don't get tired of it, which I might not. Just like I keep going whenever I like something. Whatever. It's all about what I feel like reading, right? Usually. But anyway, so I usually would put the hat on when I do 3 mystery books, but it's a little hot. I had to turn off the AC just to be able to film because the noise, and immediately it warms up in here a little bit. So I'm going to curtail or shelve or whatever you want to say the funny hat and just talk first about the 3 mystery books that I finished, and in no order, but they were all good books. I think all the books I read that I liked in June were solid 4 stars. I don't think anything made it to like a 5-star read. I don't think. Maybe. But anyway, but that means that I generally had a good reading month as far as just, okay, I like these books. The first one I'm going to talk about is a book I finished pretty late in the month, but it's kind of size order for these mysteries. And this is a book that I meant to wait until July 4, and it just wasn't showing up in the library, and I did see it at a bookshop, and it was a little more reasonable than I expected it to be, so I said, okay, I'm gonna read this. It's a mystery. I love mysteries. It's Jane Austen related, and that is The Murder of Mr. Wickham by, can't read backwards, Claudia Gray. So, I just love the title because who hasn't had dark thoughts about Mr. Wickham, at least at some point in their life? And this book was one of those situations in which you could see pretty much every character in the book having a reason to kill Mr. Wickham. And when I say that, I'm not someone who immediately thinks that one should kill somebody, but he kind of is one of those people who is not really mourned, which is kind of sad. But the premise of the book is that Emma and, oh, I don't want to give away spoilers. Okay, I will warn you, if you haven't read all of Jane Austen's books, or at least seen adaptations for all 6 books, and you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to forward this part. I'll try to put a timestamp down below, but I'm not sure when I'll get to that. So you may hear some spoilers just because this is kind of a sequel. I don't want to say sequel, but it does come after the events of all of the Jane Austen novels. First of all, okay, First of all, the timeline is a little tweaked. The author writes a note about that so that it's good for the story. I wasn't crazy about it in one sense because the events happened, I think, after Jane Austen already died. So it doesn't really make sense that some of the events that happened were things that happened in the book and would have taken place in the late 1810s, which makes, you know, in my liking to keep things historically accurate is a little bit off for me. But I think I will put up with it, number one, because the author explained that she needed that for the storytelling purpose, and number two, because I have to be sometimes a little bit lenient with things. Excuse me. See, I'm trying to be lenient, but I'm allergic to lenience apparently. Okay. So I'm not recovered. I'm good though. So the Knightleys have a house party, and they invite mostly couples from all of the Jane Austen novels. With the exception of Northanger Abbey, they invite the daughter of the main couple in Northanger Abbey. And she is also quite an imaginative person. And her name's Juliet, I think. See, I forget names when I finish the book. Yes, Juliet. And, excuse me for coughing once again. Apparently I'm allergic to Juliet, too. It's actually one of my least favorite Shakespeare's, so that makes sense. Anyway, okay. So somehow they manage in the beginning, without being too exposition-y, to explain how the Knightleys know pretty much everybody who's invited and why they're invited. But it turns out that most of, not all, but at this point, most of the couples have in some way had some bad dealings, some somewhat disastrous dealings with Mr. Wickham. So this should be a nice, relaxing house party, even though some people are dealing with some real fallout as a result. But Mr. Wickham shows up, and whoever he didn't have as an enemy, he kind of makes as an enemy. He just finds a way. And in the course of his brief stay, he is killed. And now everybody, it's a kind of bad weather time, so at first people can't leave for weather purposes, which is the only reason why Wickham was able to stay anyway. But they also have to stay because the crime must be investigated. Who done it, and why, really. I mean, there's plenty of motivation for so many people in this book. And the magistrate who's called in to do the preliminary investigation is none other than Frank Churchill, which I kind of liked in a way, because I like a little continuation, because this is completely an Emma universe, even though everybody else comes into it. But so it takes place in Highbury, so that's good, I think. It's kind of good because that is a great town for everything to take place. I think that all of Jane Austen's stories have some gossip related to it, but I think the Book of Emma, which sounds like a religious text the way I said it, but I do think that is probably one of the most claustrophobic of the stories that has, so it's great to set it there. And there are two young people who decide to investigate because but one of them feels a little more personally involved, and that is the daughter of the Tilneys, Juliet, and the son of the Darcys, Jonathan Darcy, who is, to say the least, socially awkward. At the end, the author mentions having a certain person do the reading to make sure that it was accurate, and I looked up the name of this writer who was called in to read, and they are autistic. So, and I knew that this character was like, if you ever pulled up on the internet a checklist of you might be autistic if, it was like everything. But in a way I found that interesting, because what would someone who was autistic be like in Regency era? How could they handle life? Would it be easier for them if they were in a privileged position, or would that make it even more pressure? I don't know. So this is what is kind of addressed in the book. So these two, although obviously one must be careful in this time period for, social proprieties and everything, that they don't get too close together, but they still find themselves thrown together in doing this investigating. And all kinds of, I was gonna say all kind of hilarity ensues, but not really. The one thing about this book, even though it had elements of a cozy read, the fact is that pretty much most of the couples that you may have grown to love from reading the Emma, reading all of the Jane Austen novels, now there's a lot of tension, not just between themselves and other couples, but between each other, because everybody has something maybe they didn't tell the other one, a little bit of a difficulty they've been having, and that makes me sad because I was so happy about the happy endings that they had, that now you don't want to see them falling into trouble. Some of them financially, some other things. And the couple that annoyed me the most for a while were the Bertrams, because they're just annoying. But as time went on, they became a little easier to deal with, especially when Edmund Bertram comes across Mr. Elton from the Book of Emma, and they have a bit of a scriptural discussion, and that was fun. And I don't want to give away too much, but that was one of my favorite parts of the book. It was just funny because you always wondered, what if this person met that person? And that actually is explored in the beginning. When you see certain people, I always wonder what it would be like if, for instance, Catherine Morland met Marianne Dashwood. And even though they don't, in a sense they do. And maybe if Fanny Price met Anne Wentworth, what would that be like? So at least we get to see a little bit of that. I thought it was good. I thought it was a fun book, and I think the writer writes a lot of YA. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't necessarily call it that. I'm not sure if it's YA or fantasy or both. But it was a solid, cozy mystery, good Jane Austen fun. Just a little bit of moments where I thought, oh, I just want them to just lighten up. I know there was a murder, but lighten up. And there was a scene where some people were having strawberry scones for breakfast, and I thought it seemed a little anachronistic, but I could be wrong about that. Sometimes you just have to deal with a little anachronism and just get on with the story. I say, even though I find things out and go, but moving on. I also read the next book in the Molly Murphy series, which is In Like Flynn by Rhys Bowen. And I've been really having a good time with this series. Most of the series so far has taken place in downtown New York, mostly New York City, in the early 20th century, the turn of the century, as it were. And Molly Murphy had basically fled Ireland because of something that happened and found herself in New York City. She does have certain people that she becomes friends with and some people who help her out. And of course there is a detective in the police who helps her out, but she has a sort of tense relationship with for reasons. But at this point she's solidly on her way, but still struggling in her own female detective career. And her friend, who's also in the police, actually puts her on an assignment upstate. I say upstate. Some people don't like that when I say upstate. It's not that far up the Hudson Valley, but I am one of those New York City people who says that once you are on the next stop out of Harlem on the Metro North, you are upstate. It's not accurate, but it's just a thing. So to me, it's upstate. Anyway, there's a bit of a sickness going around the Lower East Side, so it's better off that she should be better off that she goes, and she stays with a family who, with a little finagling, are led to believe that she is a cousin from Ireland of this rich man who she's staying with, and he apparently has a big family, but he grew up mostly in New York, so he's always been hospitable to his family. So it's not a bad idea, especially because they have the same first name. But she's sent up there to investigate these two sisters who are staying there, who are spiritualists, kind of contacting the dead, as it were. And this was a very popular thing at this time, in this time period. There was no mention of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I kind of wanted there to be, but I'm not sure how that would have worked out in New York. But I wanted it to be mentioned. But anyway, so that's her main reason. This family, this couple is, well, at least the wife is anxious to make this contact because their son had been kidnapped a while back, and it was terrible because they never found him. He basically was presumed dead, and it was a horrible thing to happen. So this bereaved mother would do anything to talk to him again. So obviously the police seem to think these sisters are just a bunch of shenanigans. So Molly is there to investigate, but she also is investigating a few things on her own as far as the kidnapping situation and what really happened. So she does get a little in over her head, but it is fun because it is her pretending to be someone else, but actually trying to be helpful and trying to find out something before it's too late and before there's a major danger to herself, which of course there will be. But I thought it was a fun book. I always loved to read about New York in the past, but even upstate New York in the past as well. And this did not disappoint in that way because I've traveled up there numerous times, and I've always wondered what it must have been like in the past. So this answers at least some of my questions. There was something she does toward the end of the book that I'm kind of disappointed about, just knowing her and her character. But I think I'll still be able to go on because I was spoiled about something that happens later on. It's going to be able to hold me over. And I can't say any more than that because that would be a major spoiler, but it was a good book. And the last mystery I read was, or not the last, but in this size order, was S.J. Bennett's All the Queen's Men. S.J. Bennett also wrote the Windsor Knot. So this is, I think, the second book in which the Queen of England is helping to investigate crimes, murders, and everything, but she does it in her own way, using her secretaries or assistant secretaries to do the work that she can't do. But she still finds her way into eavesdropping in ways that are awkward and kind of funny. So it begins with a piece of art that the Queen has noticed is missing. It's 2016, and it's not been around for a while. And so she puts people to ask questions, and then someone ends up dead, and it may or may not be related. And mixed in with all of this, there were poison pen messages, which are threatening letters that were left with different, mostly women, that were very unkind, especially because some of the people who were recipients also became victims. So now there's more than just okay, what's going on with my art? There is something shady going on. Is it related to the art, theft, and disappearances, or is there something more? Which I thought was kind of an interesting angle because there was a scandal in her, I forgot exactly the name of the department, but the people who look after her art, the experts as it were. I found out from watching The Crown, but I did a little bit of reading up, and there was a man whose name, of course, escapes me, who was, firmly fixed in the palace, but he was actually a spy for a Soviet spy, which is quite the thing. So you would think after that they would have extra security and be extra careful, but this kind of shows how things could get through a little bit. And I found it just as interesting, and again, hinting at the fact that there could be prequels, as it were, because the Queen refers to different other times that she's investigated when she was younger. So because this takes place in 2016, you can't get much further than that. They might go back. That leaves open to that possibility. I like the way the Queen's relationship with the family is mentioned, and it's not too dramatic. It's actually kind of cozy in its own way. I like her dialogue with her husband Philip, actually sadder now, but still quite good. The only thing I didn't really like is just so many people, so many names that got me a little bit mixed up. I was like, wait, who's that again? Wait, how does this person factor into this? That sometimes you just want to say, all right, just pare it down a little bit, but still fun. I will keep going with that series. And now I will show you the non-mystery books. I read Natalie Jenner's Bloomsbury Girls, which is a book that is not exactly a sequel, but it does carry on from the Jane Austen Society by the same writer, obviously. And I didn't realize that, even though I knew it was the same writer, I didn't realize that there was continuity there until I got a little bit further into the book and I realized, oh, wait a minute, this character was in the first book, and wait a minute. But, so there are three women, who are working at this particular bookshop, and to me it just sounds like a dream, but they all have their certain issues. One of them has struggles with one of the male employees because of their relationship, and also because she wants her input to be more taken seriously. And then one of them has doesn't mind her job so much, but there's some difficulties at home and other things, so she's got a little tension going on there. And then there is the one character who came from the Jane Austen Society, and she is on a search for a certain book, and she doesn't want anyone to know why she's looking for it. And then there are the male characters in the bookshop, and some of whom are romantically related, and some are not. And there is almost the struggle for power struggle, really, because the women are kind of kept at a certain position, but then certain wealthy women come into the story, and other people who both help out these ladies in some ways and also become their friends and almost mentors. A very, very well-known name pops up in this book, and I don't know if I want to give it away, but she wrote a number of books, most of which I haven't read, but I did see the movie Rebecca, so if that's a giveaway. I made a funny noise, but obviously this stuff didn't happen in real life, but it does happen at a time. And I did find out that the author was inspired by reading 84 Charing Cross Road, so it was taking place in those early days when Helene Hanff was writing to a bookshop in London, which is obviously a bookshop in London here. So that time period is a time period that I've always been interested in, and it was kind of fun to see what was going on in the world in London, basically, especially during that time. It's a very good bookish story. I thought it was fun. And if you like books, if you like reading about London, which you might, not a lot about Jane Austen, but a lot about women writers, if that interests you, this might be fun for you. Some things, there are difficulties, but some things fall into place almost a little too easily because of connections. But I enjoyed the story very much. Although I don't really like how their heads are cut off in this. It's like, what is this, a story about Tudor wives or something? And then I read two books that are kind of nonfiction. I want to say kind of, because this one is a children's book, storybooks that made it into a story, but it really was based on her life. So this is Ordinary Extraordinary Jane Austen. I don't know, I heard about it and I thought that was a cute idea, and the artwork is so lovely. Look at her. You'll need to see my face. Look at all the books, and her reading her books, and her father being supportive of her, and her time, kind of simplifying her life a little bit, mostly about her life with books. But hey, isn't that the best part? So if you have kids that you would like to introduce to Jane Austen, this could be a great book. So this is by Deborah Hopkinson and illustrations by Keen Lang. Last but not least, and again, I really have to do these more in updates because I realized that my little discussion of Bloomsbury Girls was kind of brief, but it's just been so many weeks that it's like I can't pick it apart quite as well as I'd like to. So I'm going to try to do some more, try to do more halfway point updates because, yes, I want to be a little more thorough. But anyway, this is getting to be a long video. But I did, in my quest to finish some books, I finished Triangle, The Fire That Changed America by David Von Drell. It's not a happy book, obviously, but it does give one the story of what labor was like in New York City, and probably a lot of other places, but specifically New York City, from around 1909 onwards. And this covers the fire, I think it's 1911, March of 1911, that happened at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And this was after a time period where they had been picketing and everything for better working conditions, which was a whole interesting but daunting story about what it was like for these women who are mostly immigrants, who were mostly escaping difficult situations where they had come from, and now they were moving to America, trying to make a better life. Some people were successful, some had to live quite a difficult time, and all they wanted was slightly better conditions and the struggle. And then there's a part where, again, some wealthy women in society, some well-known names, try to get involved to be helpful to these workers, mostly women, but still, which is both good and sometimes a little meddlesome. Sometimes other organizations were trying to help and these people got in the way. So it's an interesting thing to see how people were trying to help, but how it was also a struggle, and was it a vanity project, etc. And then, of course, the fire happens, and it goes into how the fire started, probably a cigarette. Don't smoke, people. And then how quick it spread, and why some people made it out and why some people didn't. And also how the owners were there and how they had to get out, and how it wasn't necessarily that simple for them, which didn't give me so much sympathy for them, but at least an understanding that they weren't completely on some ivory tower and not very far removed from the situation. But then the chapters that follow up a little bit about the investigating and the fallout and everything, which is good, and it was sad to see the deaths and the loss and everything. But then it gets into the trial and the lawyers, and that part becomes really fascinating to me, how people who were to blame didn't maybe pay up quite as much as they should have, but how it was reckoned, and also how some things were improved as a result of this time, but that it wasn't like a miraculously, okay, this was terrible, everybody's upset, let's make things better. It still was going to take a lot of time. But a very important piece of New York history, one of the biggest workplace disasters of that time, and probably one of the biggest until 9/11 in New York. So definitely worth a read, just not a cheerful one, but of course it isn't. So that was my reading month in June. I also started a lot of books, which I'll probably finish in either July or the months to come. If you haven't heard of a book that I mentioned in a TBR or currently reading or whatever, it may not be that I DNF'd it. I might have kept going with it, but you may hear about it again. So tune in. Hope you've enjoyed my rambling talk of the, I think, 6 books today. And if you like to hear about these kind of books, please subscribe, and please let me know what books you were enjoying in the month of June, or maybe what you're enjoying right now. And so that's all for now. This is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.